Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the Art Table again today. I wanted to talk today about pitching stories, but before I do that, we need to talk about pitching itself. Pitching is the act of trying to get someone to buy into your story. In writing particularly, it can be referred to as a blurb, which is what you typically call those 1 or 2 lines of promotion you put on the front or back of a book. However, in general circles, it's just referred to as pitching, a term derived from the way directors or scriptwriters will take their story ideas to Hollywood executives and try to get them to invest. Now, I don't have any problem with the term pitching in principle. It's just a label, and labeling is something that happens very organically, so I find it kind of pointless to rage for or against it. However, the label you use does speak somewhat to the mindset you're going to be in when you do the thing you've labeled. So when you're pitching, you're in the mindset of somebody going to a Hollywood executive, which brings us to the title of today's video. Being in the mindset of pitching to an executive is fine if you are actually pitching to an executive. If you're not, it's actually kind of a terrible place to be. And this is more a statement about the role an executive fulfills than any kind of condemnation on executives as people. I fill a lot of different roles in my own life, and I tend to approach them with a specific mindset that really I wouldn't have if I was doing anything else in my life. So, what is the implication of this as you are trying to pitch a story? Well, if you're pitching a story to an executive, you're trying to get somebody to invest money into your story for a return on investment. One very common thing to do in these pitches is to take 2 well-known media franchises that kind of embody aspects of the story you're selling and cram them together. You might say, my story is Indiana Jones meets G.I. Joe. An executive hears that and he hears, wow, big IPs with some cachet and built-in audience. If I invest money in this, I get access to those audiences and they will bring me a return on my investment. Clearly, if what you're trying to do is get someone to invest money in your story idea for a return, that is a great way to pitch your story to them. However, most of the story pitches I see are from independent creators like myself. We're not trying to get other people to invest money in our stories so they get a return of money from our stories. We're trying to get them to invest money in our stories so they get enjoyment in return. And this is a very important distinction. It's why I say pitch to audiences rather than executives. Let's continue with my example. Say someone pitches to me Indiana Jones meets G.I. Joe. Well, I naturally think of Indiana Jones, and I think of a very intelligent but still active man who goes out in the world and investigates history. And when I think of G.I. Joe, I think of a team of people who stand by one another no matter what. However, if I engage with that story, I may find instead it is a story about a man fighting techno-Nazis using a very high-tech whip and other gizmos. That is also kind of a blending of Indiana Jones and G.I. Joe. But I will still be disappointed because I did not invest in something that returned the enjoyment I expected. That is a big part of why I, as an audience member, no longer put any stock in pitches that bring me X meets Y. It doesn't actually tell me anything about the story I'm being asked to engage with. It is a pitch that is entirely about existing audiences and existing dollars and how we can get them. And that doesn't matter to me as a member of the audience. Now, here's the rub. An executive is a job. It has pretty specific sets of criteria, some of which are actually defined by law. That makes their interests and their goals pretty definable. An audience, on the other hand, is a gaggle of people that just come in from wherever. It's very hard to predict what they want. I think that's a big part of why pitching has become a much more popular paradigm, how authors can promote their stories, and something like blurb writing just isn't. So when it comes time to write a blurb for a story, how do you go about doing it? There's no one good formula, unfortunately. However, There are a couple of things I have learned to look for when I'm looking for a blurb that will actually tell me what to expect from a story. I actually mentioned this back when I talked about the Yaira trailer. Specifically, what I'm looking for is an idea of who a character is, what they want, what can get in their way, and what the consequences are if they don't get what they want. Towards that end, here is a blurb that I actually like. It comes from Seiji Mitsuaki, the user at LeadCon on Twitter or X, and it goes as follows. Lead cannot remember his past. As the sole bearer of Adam's apple, an ancient item capable of granting people's wishes, he's targeted by a mysterious organization while desperately trying to reclaim his memories. Now, right off the bat, we have a protagonist, Lead. I assume that's how it's pronounced. It could be Lied, but more on that in a second. We know Lead has amnesia, and his goal is to get his memories back. He has an item called Adam's apple, and other people want it and are trying to get it from him, so apparently they can have wishes granted. This blurb is doing a lot in a very few lines. Right off the bat, we have some pretty high stakes. An item that can just grant wishes is super dangerous. People are going to do a lot to get their hands on it. And yet, however it works, it apparently cannot restore Lead's memories, which is interesting in and of itself. So we have strong conflict and a fairly empathetic protagonist right out of the gate. But there's layers to this as well. His item is called Adam's apple. And with the kind of temptation the power it offers, it's very natural to think of a piece of fruit that was tempting to another Adam. So we could even have an interesting allusion to the Garden of Eden here. On top of that, our protagonist's name can be read Lied. Again, I'm not sure which way it's intended to be read, but if you know about the temptation in the garden, you know it hinged on a lie. Very fascinating, very interesting stuff. Layers on layers, and again, just a couple of lines of text. That's very impressive. And after I commented on it, Seiji actually sent me the rest of his promo, which reads, "Through his perilous quest in search of the lost truth, Lead realizes there's more to everything that meets the eye, including himself. How will Lead survive, and what will he find at his destination?" These are pretty good lines that expand on the theme of truth and deception, and also presents us with a question that gives a hint where the story is going to go in the end. It's a fine addition to the blurb, but given the constraints of the medium, namely Twitter, there's not always going to be enough space for people to see that. And I think it's good that he has that very strong initial pitch, which tells me, as an audience member, everything I need to know to determine whether the story will be interesting to me. At least interesting enough to check it out. I may speak some to that in the future, but for right now, those are my thoughts as far as they go. And I think it is an interesting thing to think about in general, because everyone has to promote their stories if they want anyone to read them. That's just the reality of the modern day world. As I'm getting ready for the release of Have Spell Will Travel, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about my own blurbs and how I can make them as impactful as possible. It's something I've thought about a lot because, again, I see a lot of these promos that are that kind of bland, executive-focused pitching that doesn't tell me as an audience member anything about what I'm actually going to get. It's my hope to avoid that as I release my first book, and hopefully I've made a case for why other people should try and avoid it as they seek to build their audience as well. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.